Welcome back to the Lake Superior Railroad Museum at the St. Louis County Depot here in downtown Duluth for another of our behind-the-scenes video tours. This is a lantern display from the collection of Dr. Zager, and this wonderful case was made by our curator emeritus, Tom Gannon. Remember on an earlier episode, and we'll put a link to it at the end of this one, how we talked about lanterns could be used to signal so that the conductor at the back of the train could tell the engineer at the front of the train when to go and when to stop. Part of the whole signaling of railroading is electronic. For instance, these are trackside signals. This configuration, the top light having to do with the main line, bottom light having to do with the siding, tells you that the main line is open and you can go. The siding, though, you cannot. The switch is against you. This is just the opposite. This tells the engineer that the main line is closed because you're going to diverge onto a side track because the switch is now in your favor. So that's a little bit of, well, this day has just been horrific. I mean, nothing has gone right for me. It has just been an abomination. Everybody's, the pressures of being an executive director at a world-class train museum, sometimes it's just too much. Okay, I'm sorry. I apologize. I need a drink. I know this is wrong, but luckily here at Depot Square, an exhibit at the Lake Superior Railroad Museum, we happen to have a tavern. I'll just give it a drink. Yes? I need a drink. Would you like a highball? Yeah, a highball. Do you want that up or on the rocks? I'll take that on the rocks. Well, you're in luck. I make a pretty good highball. Oh, thank you. This is much better. Now I can continue my story about signaling and how, wait for it, this all ties together. But I think we need a more railroad setting than a tavern to continue a railroad signaling story, so let's go to the car Northland. This is our car Northland. We'll put a link at the end of this episode to one we did on this car so you can learn all about its history too, because it's a great story. It's also a much nicer, more refined place to sit back, relax, have my highball, and finish my story. He was the Reverend Dan Call. Lived in Tennessee, and he was a preacher man, a Bible-thumping man from the Bible Belt. But Reverend Call had a side hustle too. He was a moonshiner. Well, it's Tennessee, and it's before the Civil War, so who wasn't a moonshiner back then? The problem was moonshine had the look, taste, smell of kerosene. It just was nasty. But the Reverend Call hired a young apprentice. He took him in, a young Jasper Newton Daniels, known to his friends as Jack. Jack had a better way to make moonshine. He filtered it through 12 feet of charcoal and then aged it in wood barrels to give it this nice brown color that you see here. And all of a sudden, aged, mellow Tennessee whiskey was all the rage. Now it's the Civil War, and we shift to New York City, where they can't get enough of this stuff. Now, there were two famous clubs during the Civil War in New York City. One was the Union Club. That's where all the Republicans held out. Now, there was also a Democratic hold place, too, and that was called a different name. And in 1876, after the war, because it's a Democratic club, Samuel Tilden is going to run for President of the United States. And young socialite Jenny Jerome is going to throw him a big party. By the way, there's a little side story about Jenny Jerome. She goes on to marry one Sir Lord Randolph Churchill, and their son becomes Winston Churchill. But that's off the beaten path, a sidetrack, if you will. Back to the main story. Jenny wants a special drink at the special club for the presidential fundraiser for her friend, Mr. Tilden. So she gets a doctor friend of hers to come up with this new drink. That's how you know drinking's good for you. This one was invented by a doctor. Anyway, this new drink is all the hit. And here's how it's made. To make this drink, it's 2 shots of smooth, mellow Tennessee whiskey. We've chosen Jack Daniels. 1 shot of sweet vermouth. A couple shots of bitters. And then top it all off with a big red maraschino cherry. But weren't we talking about railroads and signaling? Yes, we were. And the question I have is, before there was electricity, those trackside signals, what did they have? What did they use to let the train know when to go and when to stop? Well, back in the day, they had a big red ball that was suspended from a pole, kind of like a flagpole. And when that ball was hoisted up to the top, and the big red ball was on the top of the pole, it meant go straight ahead. And when it was lowered and the ball was on the ground, it meant stop. Halfway in between, proceed with caution. So what it was called when that ball was at the top, it was called a high ball. And that's where the expression in railroading comes from, let's highball. That means the ball is at the top of the pole and we can go straight and fast, straight ahead on the railroad track. It's safe to go. Now, how does that relate to this? Well, when they got this drink done, they noticed that the red cherry was on top and it was good to drink. But when the cherry was on the bottom and the glass was empty, you probably should stop. So they called this brand new drink a highball. And that's a generic term for what this is with the whiskey and the vermouth and the bitters and the cherry. That's called a Manhattan. Why? Because the name of that club in New York City where this drink was invented was the Manhattan Club. But a highball became a highball because of that maraschino cherry going from the top when you start drinking and can go to the bottom when it's empty and you have to stop drinking. Because once again, if you work it hard enough, it all comes back to the railroad. And I hope you'll come back. We're releasing more and more of these behind-the-scenes tours all the time. And when you see one, subscribe to it, like it, share it. That helps us a lot. And when you do subscribe, you'll know exactly when our next issue comes out. And in the meantime, let's take care of each other.